The wind howled across the open plains like a lonely animal searching for shelter. Snowflakes drifted sideways, pushed by the freezing winter storm that had taken over the land. The sky was dark, and the ground was covered in white ice that cracked under every step. Anyone caught outside in this weather would not survive long. Inside a small wooden cabin stood alone on the frontier, a cowboy named Elias Turner placed another piece of wood on the fire. The crackling flames lit the room with a warm orange glow. Elias rubbed his hands together, feeling the heat return to his fingers. He had lived alone for years and grown used to the cold, but even he could feel how dangerous tonight's storm was. The wind shook his cabin walls, making the old wood creak. Elias pulled his blanket tighter around his shoulders. He had already locked the door, closed the shutters, and checked that his horse was safe in the shed. He was ready to rest, ready to sleep through the storm and wake up when the daylight returned. But then he heard it. A soft sound. Too soft to be the wind. Too soft to be a wild animal. A knock. Elias lifted his head, frowning. For a moment he thought he imagined it, but then it came again, a weak, slow knock on the wooden door. He stood from his chair. Nobody came out here. His cabin was far from town, and the storm was cruel enough to push even strong men off their horses. Elias grabbed the lantern and walked toward the door. He paused for a moment and listened. Nothing. Then, shaking, fading like a dying voice, came a whisper. "Please! I'm freezing! Can I get in? Please! I beg you!" Elias's eyes widened. That voice was not the voice of a man. It was soft, small, and struggling to stay alive. He moved quickly, unhooking the lock and pulling the door open only a little, just enough to see outside. There, half collapsed in the snow, stood a young Apache woman. Her long dark hair was covered in frost. Her clothes were torn, thin, and not meant for weather like this. Her lips were blue, her cheeks pale, and her eyes barely open. She could no longer stand straight. Her knees wobbled, and she leaned against the doorframe to keep from falling. Elias had seen suffering before, but this was different. This was someone moments away from freezing to death. "Oh, hell," he muttered, and without thinking further, he swung the door wide and pulled her inside. The cold air rushed in behind her, biting at his skin, but he forced the door shut quickly. The woman collapsed to the floor as soon as she was inside. Elias dropped to his knees beside her. She was shaking violently, her hands as cold as ice. He wrapped his arms around her shoulders and lifted her gently. "Come on," he whispered. "Stay awake. You're safe now." Her eyes fluttered open, but she couldn't speak. Elias carried her closer to the fire and set her beside it. He grabbed blankets from his bed and wrapped them around her small, frozen body. He placed one of his coats over her, too, pressing it close to trap in warmth. The woman tried to speak, but her voice was nothing more than broken air. "Don't talk yet," Elias said softly. "Warm up first." He moved quickly but carefully. He heated water and helped her take slow sips. She winced as the warmth touched her tongue. Her fingers were stiff, almost purple, and he rubbed them gently between his warm hands to bring the blood back. Minutes passed. Slowly, her trembling eased. Her breathing grew steadier. The color in her face began returning, little by little. Elias finally sat beside her, catching his breath. He looked at her again, seeing her more clearly now that the frost was melting away from her skin. She was young, maybe in her early 20s. Her eyes were dark and cautious, studying him even though she was barely awake. She did not move away from the fire. She kept her hands in his coat, trying to pull the warmth into her bones. "What's your name?" Elias asked gently. The woman swallowed, her throat still tight. It took her a few seconds to answer. "Nayeli." Her voice was soft, tired, but no longer fading. "My name is Nayeli." Elias nodded. I'm Elias Turner. Nayeli looked around the cabin. Her eyes were alert, taking in the blankets, the fire, the old wooden walls. She seemed unsure whether she should feel safe or scared. Why did you let me in? She asked quietly. Her voice trembled, not from the cold now, but from surprise. Elias shrugged lightly. Because you were freezing, anyone would have done the same. Nayeli shook her head slowly. No, she whispered. Not anyone. Elias didn't argue. He knew she was right. Many people in this land did not treat Apache people kindly, but he also knew dying in the snow was no fate for any human being. Rest, he said. You're safe here. Nayeli looked at him for a long moment, and there was something in her eyes, confusion mixed with a fragile trust. She tightened the blanket around herself and leaned a little closer to the fire. The storm outside grew louder, shaking the cabin walls harder than before. Nayeli flinched at the sound. You were out there alone? Elias asked. Yes, she whispered. My group was traveling south. The storm hit suddenly, snow everywhere. I fell behind. I tried to follow their tracks, but wind covered the ground. Everything disappeared. Elias listened quietly. He could imagine it. A sudden winter storm could erase footprints in seconds. Getting separated meant death unless someone found shelter. How long were you walking? He asked. Hours, Nayeli said. She closed her eyes, remembering the cold pressing against her bones. I thought I would die in the snow. Then I saw your window light. You survived, Elias said firmly. That's what matters. Nayeli gave a faint smile, tiny but real. Her shoulders loosened. She pulled his coat tighter around herself. For the first time in a long time, she felt heat against her skin. Elias stood up and grabbed a pot. You need food, something warm. He cooked simple soup, broth with vegetables, and when it was ready, he set a bowl in front of her. Nayeli held it with shaky hands and took slow spoonfuls, sighing softly as warmth finally spread through her. Elias ate too, sitting nearby but giving her space. The fire crackled, filling the silence with a calm, steady sound. The storm outside faded into a distant roar. After a while, Nayeli spoke again. You are alone here? Elias nodded. Yes, just me and my horse. No family? Not anymore. Nayeli lowered her eyes. I am sorry. Elias gave a small nod. He appreciated the sincerity in her voice. She finished the soup and set the bowl down. Her strength was slowly returning, though she still looked exhausted. You should sleep, Elias said. You've been through hell. Nayeli hesitated. Her eyes moved to the door, then to the windows, then back to him. Elias could see the fear in her, fear that he might change, fear that she might not be welcome after resting, fear of trusting someone whose world was different from hers. I won't harm you, Elias said quietly. I won't let the cold take you either. Nayeli breathed out slowly. She shifted the blankets, lying sideways near the fire. Elias placed one more log into the flames to keep the cabin warm through the night. He moved to the opposite side of the room, giving her distance so she would feel safe. He sat in an old chair, rested his hat over his eyes and closed them. But he didn't sleep. He listened to the storm, he listened to the fire, and he listened to Nayeli's breathing, making sure it stayed slow and steady. Hours passed. Near dawn, the storm began to weaken. The walls stopped shaking. Snow no longer slammed against the door. The wind turned into soft whistling instead of wild howling. The worst of the night was gone. Elias stood quietly and checked the room. Nayeli was still sleeping, but no longer shivering. Her face had color again. Her breathing was deep and peaceful. She looked human again, not a frozen shadow fighting death. Elias stepped softly so he wouldn't wake her. He checked the shutters, the door, the roof, everything that might have been damaged by the storm. His cabin had survived another winter night. When he turned back toward the fire, he saw Nayeli open her eyes. She blinked at the warm light, then at Elias. "You stayed awake?" she asked softly. "Had to," he said with a small smile. "Someone had to make sure the fire didn't die." Nayeli sat up slowly. She looked stronger now, her eyes clearer than they had been the night before. "Thank you," she whispered. "If you had not opened the door, I would not be alive now." Elias nodded. "Anyone deserves a chance to live." Nayeli looked at him for a long time, then lowered her head in quiet respect. Outside, the first light of morning touched the plains, creating a soft glow on the untouched snow. The world looked peaceful again, but both of them knew it would not remain that way. Tension between settlers and Apache villages was high. Anyone who saw her here could bring trouble for both her and Elias. She held the blanket tightly around her shoulders and looked toward the window. "What will happen now?" she asked quietly. Elias didn't answer yet. He walked to the window and looked at the endless stretch of white land. He didn't know the answer, but he knew one thing clearly. The storm outside had passed, but a different kind of storm might come soon, and he wasn't sure if either of them was ready. Morning sunlight spread slowly across the frozen plains, touching the snow with a gentle golden glow. The storm was gone, but the land still looked dangerous, quiet, and empty. Inside the small wooden cabin, Nayeli sat near the fire, warming her hands while Elias checked his horse in the shed outside. She felt stronger now, but the fear inside her had not disappeared. She was far from her people, and she did not know if they were safe or even alive. When Elias returned, snow covered his boots and shoulders. He brushed it off and stepped inside. Nayeli looked up at him, waiting for him to speak, but he remained quiet for a long moment. "The storm is over," he finally said, "but trouble might come today." Nayeli lowered her gaze. She knew exactly what he meant. Settlers from nearby areas often patrolled the land after storms, searching for anything suspicious: tracks, signs of camps, or people who did not belong to them. If they found her here, they would think she was dangerous. They would never believe she had simply been lost and trapped in the cold. Nayeli wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and spoke softly. "If they come, I do not want you to face problems because of me." Elias leaned against the wall and looked at her with calm, steady eyes. "I'm not sending you out there alone. You wouldn't last an hour in this snow." "But if they find me here, they will trouble you," she warned. "They can try," Elias said, and even though his voice was quiet, it carried confidence and strength. "I'm not letting them take you." Nayeli's chest tightened at his words. She did not understand why a stranger cared this much. She wanted to believe he meant it, but the memories of the past reminded her to stay cautious. She looked down at her hands and said nothing. The morning passed slowly. Elias prepared food, fed his horse, and kept checking the area outside. Nayeli helped him quietly, gathering wood and cleaning the bowls. She still felt weak. But every hour in the warm cabin made her stronger. Just before noon, Elias suddenly tensed. He walked to the window and looked out carefully through a small crack. Nayeli followed him with her eyes. She saw his jaw tighten. "Riders," he said. Nayeli froze. Her heartbeat quickened. "How many?" she whispered. "3," Elias replied. "Coming from the east. Looks like men from the nearest town." Nayeli's fingers gripped the blanket. Fear raced through her. She remembered their harsh faces, the way they handled anyone who looked like her. Her breath shook. Elias stepped toward her quickly. "Come with me." He led her to the corner of the cabin and lifted a wooden board on the floor. Beneath it was a small cellar, dark, cold, and hidden from outside view. "Hide down there," Elias said. Stay quiet. They won't find you unless they tear down the whole cabin. Nayeli stared into the dark space and then looked up at him. You should not lie for me, she whispered. It is dangerous. I'm protecting someone who needs help, Elias said firmly. That's not lying. Nayeli swallowed her fear and nodded quietly. She stepped down into the cellar. Elias lowered the board carefully, leaving a tiny gap so she could breathe and hear what happened above. She curled up in the darkness, her heart beating faster with every step Elias took away from her. She could hear the riders approaching now, the sound of hooves crunching in the snow, the jingle of metal, the voices of men laughing carelessly. Then came the knock. Elias opened the door. Nayeli listened, pressing her ear close to the gap. Morning, Turner, a rough voice said. Storm hit hard last night. It did, Elias answered calmly. You seen anything strange around here? Another voice asked. Tracks? A stray horse? Maybe an Apache scout moving through? Nayeli held her breath. Her fingers gripped the cold ground beneath her. No, Elias said. Nothing out here but snow. Mind if we take a look inside? The first man asked. Nayeli's heart stopped. Actually, I do mind, Elias replied, his voice steady. You can check the land all you want, but the cabin stays closed. I don't owe you boys anything. The men went silent for a moment. Nayeli felt the air shift. She could imagine them staring at Elias with suspicion and irritation. You sure you're not hiding something? One of them asked. I'm sure, Elias said. Another long silence. Nayeli could hear the wind outside and the snow crunching as men shifted their weight. She prayed they would leave. Finally, a voice spoke again. Fine. We'll keep looking around, but if you see anything, or anyone, you tell us. I'll let you know, Elias replied. Footsteps faded. The horses snorted. The sound of hooves moved farther and farther away. When the cabin door finally closed again, Nayeli let out a breath she had been holding for far too long. Elias waited several seconds before lifting the board. He knelt and reached down to help her out. Nayeli climbed up, her legs shaking from fear more than cold. She stood in front of him, breathing hard. Elias placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. They're gone, he assured her. You're safe. Nayeli looked into his eyes. Something inside her softened. You risked yourself for me, she whispered. Why? Because you deserved help, Elias answered, and because I wouldn't sleep right knowing I let someone die. Nayeli lowered her gaze. For a moment, she could not speak. He had protected her like she mattered, like her life had value. That surprised her. She had lived most of her life watching people treat her people as less than human. Thank you, she said quietly. Elias nodded. Now we need to decide what's next. Nayeli knew he was right. She could not stay here forever. Eventually, someone else might come. The riders might return, and she still needed to find her group. Her chest tightened again at the thought of her family and friends wandering the land without her. I must find my people, she said softly. If they are alive, they will be looking for me. Elias thought for a long moment. Then he grabbed his coat and started preparing his horse. I'll take you, he said. Nayeli stared at him, surprised. You will guide me? It's better than you walking alone, Elias replied. I know the land. I know the safe paths. If we leave now, we might reach the canyon trail by evening. Nayeli hesitated. She did not want him to risk anything more. But she also knew she could not make the journey alone in this weakened state. She stepped closer to him. If we travel together, it will be dangerous. Elias gave a half smile. Danger and I are old friends. Nayeli let out a small breath, part fear, part comfort. She nodded. By afternoon, they set out into the snow. Elias rode the horse, and Nayeli sat behind him, holding the saddle lightly. She felt the cold air bite her cheeks, but the sky was clear, and the sunlight warmed her back. The land stretched wide around them, white, empty, endless. They traveled through narrow paths between snowy hills. Elias pointed out hidden dangers, a frozen river under thin ice, thick snow that could hide stones, and places where wolves sometimes hunted. Nayeli observed everything carefully. She had grown up learning the land, too, but this storm had changed everything, erasing the signs she depended on. Elias's knowledge guided them safely. As they rode, they talked in small moments. "Why do you live alone?" Nayeli asked. "Life pushed me this way," Elias answered quietly. "Sometimes solitude is easier, and sometimes lonely," Nayeli said. Elias looked back at her with a faint smile. "Sometimes." Later, Nayeli told him about her people's journey south, about the storms, the long travel, and the fear of crossing land where settlers lived. "They call us dangerous," she whispered, "but we only want to survive winter." Elias listened. He did not judge. The wind carried their voices softly across the plains. As afternoon turned to evening, they reached a narrow ridge overlooking a long stretch of valley. In the far distance, smoke rose gently into the sky, thin, steady, controlled. Nayeli sat up straighter, hope bursting in her chest. "That is my people's fire," she whispered. "They are alive." Elias stopped the horse and looked at the smoke. "Looks like they made it through the storm." Nayeli climbed off the horse, her legs trembling with excitement. She turned to Elias, her eyes bright with relief. "My people will welcome you," she said softly. "You helped me live. They will want to thank you." But Elias shook his head. "They'll be wary of me, and maybe they should be. This is as far as I go." Nayeli's smile faded slightly. She stepped closer to him, searching his face. "You saved my life," she said. "You protected me. You shared your fire and your home. You treated me like I mattered." "You do," Elias said simply. Nayeli lowered her gaze, her voice soft. "I will not forget you." Elias nodded. "Nor I you." For a moment they stood quietly, the wind brushing past them. It felt like the world had paused, letting them speak without words. Then Nayeli stepped back. She held his coat tightly around her shoulders, but her heart felt exposed. "I hope one day you will come to our camp," she said. "We will have a place for you." Elias gave a small smile. "Maybe one day." Nayeli turned toward the distant smoke. She took a few steps, then looked back one last time. Elias sat on his horse, watching her with calm eyes. The man who lived alone, the man who expected nothing from anyone, had helped her when no one else would. Nayeli placed her hand over her heart. "Goodbye, Elias Turner." "Goodbye, Nayeli," he said softly. She walked toward her people, leaving footprints in the snow. The wind gently erased them behind her, but Elias knew he would remember each one. He waited until she reached the far ridge and disappeared from sight. Only then did he turn his horse around and begin the long ride back to his empty cabin. The plains felt a little colder now, but something warm stayed inside him, something stronger than fire, something he could not quite name. It was the memory of a desperate knock, a quiet plea, and a bond formed between two people who never should have trusted each other, but did. And he knew, deep in his heart, that their paths would cross again one day.